Welcome to Make Your Own Fun. I'm here with Lindsey Warren, and she is the co-host of the Alternaverse podcast, which I was just listening to the other day, and I was really impressed by and got some good
Thank
stuff
you.
out of it. Yeah. I mean, not really familiar with a lot of the East Coast writers, so it was cool for me to just, hear them talk and talk about their life experience and, writing and things like that. And so, another thing that is pretty cool that you probably don't know is that there is a huge Delaware connection. So when I was younger, when my grandparents were still alive, they lived in Lewis, Delaware.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And so when I was a kid, up until probably my middle teens, we would always go to like Rehoboth Beach.
Yeah.
So that whole area, and I've been to like Oceanside and everything. So have you always lived in Delaware?
Yeah, born and raised. I mean, there were 4 years where I went to grad school out of state, but outside of that, yeah, Delaware since I was born.
That's awesome. So I guess before starting the podcast, I guess just maybe speak a little bit about what kind of got you into writing and what kind of got you into like open mics and going to readings. And was there a time when maybe somebody like gifted you a book or said like, hey, Lindsey, you got to come check out this thing that's going on downtown or whatever?
Okay. Excuse me. So I really started writing when I was about 12. When I was 12, I wanted to be a nun, so I was deep into like the literature of the Catholic doctors of the church, and read a lot of the different prayers that were composed by different saints. And I was like, these are really beautiful, these are really meaningful. And so I guess I tried to write my own. And then after a while, like as my relationship with Catholicism changed, the the prayers that I was writing became more poetry, I think.
Hmm.
But I never stopped. I guess I never stopped writing towards something that was divine,
Okay.
if that makes any sense. Um, as far as like any sort of book that really changed me, when I was in high school, I really got into like the confessional poets like Anne Sexton. Um, I guess you would also consider, uh, all of our contemporaries, Robert Lowell as well, and reading them and being like, oh, so you can talk about this kind of stuff in poems? That's interesting. Um, and I was also a little darker. So I was reading confessional poets at the time, and they were, they were writing from like a history of just of trying to break abuse cycles and mental illness cycles, and so their stuff could be a little darker.
Hmm.
And I was also reading poems by Marvin Bell and Rita Dove, who were not so dark. They were like on a different end of that spectrum. And I'm like, oh, so you can write poetry and not like have to fall into a deep dark depression and end up having to just go all the way down there. It's like, okay, maybe I can do this. So that really also encouraged me and just opened up just a whole world of possibilities with literature.
Cool. Do you remember kind of like your first open mic experience? Was it somebody like a friend or a relative like told you about it and kind of pulled you in, or was it something you just kind of wandered into yourself?
Um, so I guess after high school, when I really like started to take writing and I guess being a writer seriously. I thought, okay, so maybe I do have to do this, whole public reading thing, which was never a strength for me. I have, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stage fright. Or at least I did then. And so there used to be, and I don't know if it's still around, and if it is, fantastic, a second Saturday poetry reading in Delaware or Wilmington. It was the hosted on the second Saturday of every month, and the place traveled from cafe to cafe. But that was the first time I ever like really read anything of mine in public that I felt like, oh, this is gonna terrify me, but it's also maybe gonna leave some sort of impression or like introduce me into the writing circles of northern Delaware. And so I went to that for a couple years, and that really taught me a lot about just being in public as a poet.
Very cool, very cool. I remember, just kind of getting started off, doing stuff like that. And it's always freaky when you get up with like the notebook or whatever, and you feel like you're in fifth grade giving the oral report, and your hands are like, ah,
Yeah.
yeah, oh God, and you get up there, and I feel like it's hard or terrifying until you get like that first person to be like, oh yeah, like they vocalize it, or like somebody who's just like woo, or and then when you're done and you get the clapping, hopefully you never had the experience. I've been to a couple places where there's just like, five people in the room and like half of them are just waiting for their turn to read. And then you get that one person in the back of the room that's like half awake and they're just like,
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I have a lot of fond memories of those readings, and I remember really like full rooms, like a large crowd, and most of the people that I came in contact with were very supportive. Joe Allen, Jamie Brown, um, uh, um, Jane Miller, like just all these um, really generous poets. Joanne Belinkett, the former poet laureate of Delaware, like just really, just really understanding and compassionate writers, and I guess also performers. And yeah, like going back to what you were saying, it's like I'm like, oh, thank God they can't see how red my face is, but they can hear how terrified I am in my voice. So that was something I really had to hone over the years.
um, have you performed outside of Wilmington? I mean, you were talking about going to school like out of state. Did you do anything there on campus with readings, or did you just wait until you got back to Delaware to kind of start doing that stuff?
Oh no, we did a lot of readings actually at Cornell. There's a very particular reading that every first year MFA writer has to do at a local bookstore called Buffalo Street Books, and so everybody had to do that. Like that was you weren't allowed to opt out of that, so you just had to suck it up and deal with it, no matter how bad your stage fright was. And they were also televised, so it's like extra pressure. Um, but I guess they're just like, if this is something that you want to do, you want to write and share your work, like that I think is, or at least was, doing poetry readings, like one of the main ways to get your stuff out to a listening ear, and market any sort of book that you might have. Um, but I guess, I don't know, recently I've been thinking like, what other ways can we get poetry out to people, you know? And books are wonderful, poetry readings are wonderful, but there's got to be another way or other ways, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we've got the Zoom chat stuff going on with everybody and their brother has a podcast now, I feel like. Um, but the internet's a powerful thing, and that seems to be where things are going. In fact, with audiobooks, and with poetry in general, of just making each poem a separate track, kind of like an album, but you can,
Yeah.
on iTunes, or I guess Bandcamp, where you can just go in and like take out individual tracks. And it's like, well, hey, maybe I like these four poems. That sounds horrible to talk about somebody's collection like that, but maybe what's a better way to phrase it? These four really resonated with me. I'll cherry pick these four, or whatever. And then
Well done.
uh, those other like 77 people watching, or watching this later, are going to be like, that, oh, okay, he's not a jackass, all right. But yeah, but you know what I'm talking about, where it's like, it's sometimes it's just a lot to digest, that much material at once.
Yeah.
Sometimes people, and it really helps to have YouTube clips, so of you like reading in public, or whatever. um and one thing I've found in my experience too is that, for me personally, I feel like getting stuff out on a page, notebook, or typing, this is me typing, um, or whatever, that's getting it out. That's like, I gotta get this out, or I can't get on with my day. But then performing it or reading it in public is really where you grow, because then you're getting a sense of like, the blinders are off, and you're like, oh, this is the outside world. This is what other people are going through. This is kind of how you connect with people that have gone through similar stuff. And also going like, whoa, okay, she went there, like, or that's how she wanted to say that. Like, I never would have done that. Like, that's cool. And you put it in like what I call the memory warehouse. So like when you're working on like the next thing or a collection, and you're like, you know, trimming the fat or whatever you want to say, and you're going through
Yeah.
like, I need a poem about that. Oh, remember like 6 months ago I went to that reading and that girl did that thing. Like, okay, well, I'm not her, I didn't have that experience, but maybe I can relate that to something I went through, or
Mhm.
whatever. And then next
Mhm.
thing you know, you've got a new poem. So just my two.
And and I think you brought up a good point where like getting it out on paper is, getting it out, but then taking it to the public, that's where you really become super vulnerable. And, like as you mentioned, like, reading your stuff to an audience. And sometimes, like, I know this has happened to me where I'm reading a poem and there are certain parts in the poem that are especially like, ooh, for me, or like, ooh, inducing for me. And then I'll read it and there's nothing. And then I'll come to something else and then that will elicit an ooh from like an audience member or something. And I'm like, oh, so that's really, so that's really where the poem goes, or that's really what the poem is putting out there. Interesting. And I put that in my, would you call it memory warehouse?
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it's true. I mean, we're all different people. We all come from different places, and
Yeah.
one thing, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I told her like, yeah, it doesn't matter if you're the same age, same race, or whatever. Everybody's upbringing and their household is different. Everybody's job is different. Somebody could have had a great day and got a promotion at their job, or somebody could have got laid off, or somebody is molding young minds and they're being complete shitheads to them, the class. And it's just like, everybody coming to that reading is coming in at different levels. I mean, different levels of on stage or writing experience, but just life experience too. So and I was talking to her and I said, yeah, I mean, I remember not even that long ago, a few years ago, just kind of slogging off what I would call like the weekend warriors writers, where it's like sometimes you just get people that they come out like every once in a while, but then it's like you feel like they're always reading a poem about their cat, or they're always reading that poem about their garden, or
Right.
they're always reading that poem about like, there was so many different kinds of yarn at Yarn Barn. And I was like, yes, it's called Yarn Barn. Please finish your poem, you know? But you know what I mean? And it's not like necessarily, I guess the stereotype is like, people over 70, 75, and they're coming in and they're just like, and the great jamboree of 1962 was so mind-boggling, so entertaining. And then you're like, oh, and then they're like, that we literally took a nap at the end, and you're like, but I mean, and it's tough because I come from also a performing background. Like, I've made films and done stand up, and went to Second City and all that stuff. So I'm just used to being like
Cool.
all over the place, and then
Right.
focusing that in a poem. But it's like, the older I get, at least I'm trying to be a good person. I don't know, but it's so hard for me to relate because I do get nervous. I get up there and I'll read something really vulnerable about getting laid off of a job or some weird interaction with somebody. And
Right.
then um you sit down and you're like, oh, like you want to have an imaginary cigarette. It's just so cathartic. You're just like, oh wow, God, I gotta live through that. And
Yeah.
then, and then the person
Yeah.
gets up and they have their phone and they're just like, and so this year, I don't know how the petunias are doing, and you know, with the yard, and I was like, and you're thinking, you're tapping somebody else. Is this part of the poem? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, like I mean, it's not for me to tell anybody what to do, especially with their own work. I'm not one to do excuse me, like a big preamble before I read anything. I guess I'd rather just let you experience the poem how you want to experience it. I'm not trying to like direct you in any particular way or making you think about a particular thing. Like I just want you to experience what I'm saying how you want to.
Right.
And and I know a lot of people, like that. A lot of people would prefer like some more guidance, which is cool. But I mean, if you're up there for like 15, 20 minutes, I'm not going to spend a lot of that time, giving you a dissertation on what one poem is going to be about. I don't have the time for it. And I just don't think it's necessary.
No. For the most part, I think preamble, if you absolutely have to do it because you're just like, man, I have this shit day and this guy person said this and in the store and I didn't have time to tell them off and here's my telling them off poem or whatever. And you're like, oh, okay. But also it does suck, I think, as an audience member, if somebody's telling you what it is or telling you it's this kind of a poem, because that almost like put something on your shoulders of like expectation, of like, oh, well, they're saying this poem is gonna knock my socks off, and if it doesn't particularly knock your particular socks off, then you're like, eh. Or if they're saying it, here's a hilarious thing that happened to me last week, and I turned it into a poem, and you're like, when's funny bucks, or and if this is really tough if someone says like this is something I dealt with and it's like going through some kind of horrible recovery from like an accident or like an illness or something and you're just sitting there and they're like I, I've actually been to a reading where this is horrible but someone introduced it that way and then they got and they're like, all right, so now on to part 7. And so they were doing a featured reading, and I was like, oh my God, the entire 25 minutes is one thing. Like,
Yeah.
we need a drum solo or an intermission or something. But and again, it sucks. Like the older I get, the more I'm like, okay, I've got to just, not be judgmental, but it's also, I think, we're wired now with, like I said, with cell phones and everything, that we take our information in little snippets. You know what I mean? So I guess
Yeah.
if you could kind of go into how you and your co-host kind of met and decided to do the podcast, maybe.
Oh, Annie. Annie Gould. She was my cohort at Cornell, and she's wonderful. She's brilliant. She's talented. She's just fun to hang out with, fun to talk to. Um, very, just very it's very sensitive to just the more sophisticated aspects of thinking and writing, and I thought, and she's also very like widely read. Like she is, her library is incredible. So like I was, talking to her early back in, or late 2020, early 2021, and just talking about like, so I was thinking about maybe doing a podcast in which we interview poets, and we want to get at poets that run the gamut, from super famous ones to people or poets who are still like doing undergrad work, and because it's all valid, it's all beautiful, it's all worthwhile, it's all worth reading. I guess just trying to like pull back the camera a little bit to have like a wider perspective of the kind of poetry that is out there. And plus, just any excuse to talk to your heroes. I'll, yes, please sign me up. And so Annie was instrumental in like doing the mechanics of it because I don't really, I've never done a podcast before. I'm not very electronically savvy, and she is. And then I was more on the end of like trying to secure guests to interview and then coming up with interview questions. Though, whenever Annie had a question or anything she wanted to know, hopefully she felt free to jump in. Like I'm hoping that that I provided her enough space to do what she wanted in the interview, because I certainly felt like I had space to do what I wanted to do in the interview, and I'm hoping that was reciprocated. And I just had a ball. I had a blast. Um, and then just life kind of happened, and we both got super busy, and like I said, things happen and things get in the way, other responsibilities get in the way. So I guess I'd like to say it's on hiatus right now, because I do want to revisit it, um, hopefully with Annie, and just take it a little farther than where we had.
Very cool, very cool. I myself have been doing this for about a year and a half, and I've all wonderful people, but I have gone through three now co-hosts in a year and a half. And for whatever reason, and like I said, they're all awesome people, but it's like everybody's really into it for anywhere between like a month, 2 months, and everybody has ideas and they're really excited and they have people they want to talk to, or they, cool, because we also do comedy bits on our show too, and they have like skit ideas and music, and then it's like after that they're just like, oh well, I have this thing, or can't do it this week. And I noticed that like once you go more than like 2 weeks without a show, it's really hard to get that rhythm back, which is why like we have our like co-host thing, or we used to do the co-host thing where it was more like I don't know, morning radio show kind of thing, but through Zoom, and we would tell funny stories and anecdotes and have sound effects, and it was really fun. But I've always tried to keep like the interview stuff going too, because it's like if the co-host thing goes away, then you're like, and it's always been a thing where it's like the want to spend more time with family, or like a job thing comes up, and or school, you know what I mean, or taking a class or something, and it's like you can't ever say to someone that your podcast is more important than their family or their schooling or their job
Right.
or whatever. So it's just really hard to figure that out. So I think kudos to you guys for like keeping it going as long as you did, if it is even done, or it's going to change into something else, because it's not easy. It's not easy. And I know you guys have been through this before, like I have, where it's like you've got maybe two or three people, what I call like in the hopper, like you might interview or you're kind of reaching out to, and then you get something, and then it's like people cancel, people have life events come up, and then you're just like, which is why if you took a minute to look at the channel, there's a lot of there's a lot of videos of me doing shenanigans, but there's also a lot of videos of me where it's like clearly I just walked, I'm like doing laundry and I go around behind the laundromat filming myself by a fucking brick wall because it's like you just don't know when you're going to need to plug something like that in. And I always
Right.
like to have maybe one or two things that I haven't uploaded to YouTube yet because it's like I don't like to go more than a week or two without uploading because people are fickle, you know?
Yeah, and doing a podcast, especially if it's, weekly or like on a schedule, that is a commitment to your point. And sometimes, and also to your point, like not gonna like sacrifice schooling for like weekly podcast, no matter, how fun it is or no matter how much you enjoy doing it. Some things are just more important. And, like Annie is she's enrolled in a PhD program right now. She's studying to be a therapist. She's trying to, just move forward with her professional and personal life. And, I'm really proud of her. And that takes up a lot of one's time. And,
Sure.
I understand. And, that's what she needs to do. And she needs to go all in and go for it. And, I support her and I have nothing but love and respect for her. She's come a long way and she's great. And I would love to do this again with her if it ever happens. I mean, that was half the fun, was doing it with my friend
Oh
who
yeah,
is
yeah.
also a poet and who loves poetry. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm not mourning it, but I'm also, I guess I'm keeping an open mind about what it could be.
Right. I mean, just as an example, you could always um, interview people, or one of you at a time could interview people, or you could go out to like a reading or an open mic and just, or even put up like a weekly events bulletin or something
Yeah.
and connect it to here and just have like a little video playing. I'm just like, there are readings going on this month at, these venues or just something to have like content up. I don't know if you just want to have just the two of you, both interviewing somebody at the same time. It's a thought, you know.
That is a good thought. Yeah, yeah, that's something to consider for sure. Excuse me.
No worries. And this is something that I do, for me, for the comedy stuff is it's something I can do. And I'm also, teaching myself how to use editing software. So hopefully this stuff gets a little bit less embarrassing with each new video. But and I try to rope friends into it too. And we've made some short films and stuff like that. So you never know what things can lead to,
Yeah,
So
for sure.
I guess let people know just in terms of like I know you say that you have some books. So where are you at with your past stuff and maybe what are you working on now?
Um, so I have three books published by Spoit and Dieville. Um, Unfinished Child was my first one. Archangel and the Overlooked was the second, with cover art done by local artist Katie Driscoll. And then the third book is Sentence Forest, with cover art by, again, local artist Eurissa Luna. And I mean, they're mainly about, you know, grief and I think about something that Fanny Howe said, in which she's basically saying like our language leaves little room for confusion, and like that's something that has been on my mind for a very very long time. And like I said, a lot of those poems were about grief. Like the first book specifically was about my mother's death, which took place about 5 years ago. And if you've ever lost anyone close to you like that, or a loved one or a family member, you realize that death just takes away everything you thought you knew about anything and doesn't replace it with anything. You're just like, nothing makes sense anymore. Nothing.
Right.
And I think I was just writing my way through that kind of amnesia, like not remembering how things work, not remembering how time works, not remembering how 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 you feel, like how to think. Um, so like a lot of those, especially the first one, Unfinished Child and Sentence Forest, there are a lot of poems in there too about that kind of confusion, and I think like that was very important for me to just get it out at the time to work through all that confusion with these poems. Now I think I've I'm thinking more about, or at least I was thinking about the poem as an object, going back to the objectivist poetry that was popular like after World War II in America with Zukofsky and Nidecker. And that's why I thought small and like would put the poems on tiny pieces of paper and then post them everywhere because, well, first of all, it freed me from the idea of having to submit poetry to a publisher and just wait on whether or not they liked it enough to want to put it out there. And that would also take time if they said yes. Here it was so immediate, I could just write it down, put it on a lamppost, take a picture of it, put it on social media, and reach how many people that way that it reaches. I guess just as an experiment, just to see if it would be in any way or by any definition successful. It's also the idea of immortality through art, which is something I think all artists at one point or another, or on one level or another, whether or not they want to admit it, is something that we kind of want. So by putting poems in a place where they could so easily be removed, whether it be by another person or by the elements, just really help to also erode away that idea of immortality, of permanence. And it allowed myself to just be open to more flux in what I write and how I get stuff out there. Um, and so now I'm thinking about film, actually. I have an idea that I kind of want to. I'm dying to like work with people on this. Tentatively called poetry TV show. Ideally, it'll just be about like 15 minutes, like one of those old shows that used to be on Adult Swim on Cartoon Network, and just be full of like little segments of animated poems by different people, with maybe reoccurring poetic segments that other writers can get in on. And of course, animated by whomever wants to animate. So if you know anybody, I'm just trying to get like a skeleton of that set up so that I can put some flesh on it and then maybe get it out into the world. But yeah, I'm just that's been what's on my brain recently, or this past 2 years, I'd say, is just how else can we get poetry out to the public, especially in a public that where like 50 years ago their media was completely different from what it is now, and especially with just how much access to knowledge we have now.
Right.
Like, let's take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think social media is getting shorter and shorter in terms of the sound bites, the video bites.
Mm,
So even though I'm doing a 30-minute podcast or whatever, I mean, I'm not an idiot that I know that like if a video of any kind of video that I make gets like 100 or 200 views, I feel ecstatic, especially because it's long form. Whereas TikTok stuff that's like 30 seconds is going to get thousands or millions of views because
yeah,
the teenagers will watch it over and over and over, and they'll send it to their friends and their friends. It's like that old Pizza Hut. Then they'll tell two friends, they'll tell two friends, they'll tell two friends.
guilty. I do it.
I haven't done TikTok yet, but yeah, I'm probably gonna take the plunge here now that it's a new year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah, it's a little crazy that it's 2023. Um,
What
so
is
this
time?
one, I know. But yeah, I think your idea is awesome. I would definitely
Thank
jump
you.
on that. I think it's like limitless in its potential. Um,
Yeah, the possibilities really are just there's it's all that you can imagine, really.
oh yeah. So sadly, as we're getting ready to, I know, wrap it up here, I wanted to kind of give you a platform so people can hear it from you, where they can find your work online and any websites that you might want to plug.
Um, well, there's the Alternaverse blog, which is in flux, like I said before, but there's still stuff on there in case anybody's interested, including interviews. Um, Spoit and Dieville's website. Should I spell it?
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
oh,
I
okay.
never assume people know that if you're going to abbreviate anything, you know.
Well, it's a Dutch phrase, so I'm gonna have to just bring it up because for as much as I write, Eric, it's embarrassing to admit I'm a bad speller.
Most
Bad.
writers are, because we're not
Oh,
thinking like, we're all thinking like, "Ugh," getting it on the page, you know.
right.
Don't know the feeling. Go ahead.
Oh, so Spuyten Duyvil is Spuyten, Duyvil. It means spinning devil. I think it's named after a little waterway in New York. Um, and so that's where my three books were so graciously published. Um, I mean, this like the stuff that I said that I take pictures of. That's on my Instagram. I have a ridiculous handle, and I've had it for years, and I'm not going to change it anytime soon, no matter how ridiculous it is. It's disco_strawberry.
Which is awesome.
Thank you, appreciate it. Um, I mean,
Um,
it's like my AOL address at this point. Like, I still have it. I don't use it, but
it's
damn
out
if I'm
there.
gonna get rid of
It's
it.
out there if people want to do a deep dive. So I guess lastly, is there any like a YouTube thing or anywhere where people can find you, like maybe clips of you reading your work or anything like that?
I have dabbled in some poetry animation on a YouTube channel that I have. I think it's just Lindsey Warren, if I remember correctly. I want to do more in that vein. It's just it's a matter of, to quote the Robert Haas book, time and materials, and I don't have that right now. But I'm hoping that that will change soon. So
Very
yeah, I
cool.
have like I guess a YouTube channel just under my name. It's
Okay.
still there.
All right. Well, as we wrap it up here, I'll quote you're talking about spelling, but sometimes even what you're trying to say doesn't come across if you're a writer too. So I always quote the name of that David Sedaris book, which is Me Talk Pretty One Day.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you so much for being on the show. And
Thank you very much. I had fun.